Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics to help bridge the gap that exists between what we know and what we do in early childhood education. We're starting conversations with academics, authors, decision makers, educators, and parents so that together we can improve the quality of early childhood education while at the same time protecting and respecting the childhood experience. Challenging behaviors are nothing new in early childhood education, and yet there is something different going on. For a variety of reasons, challenging behaviors seem to be increasing both in intensity and frequency. Dayna Abraham is no stranger to challenging behaviors. As a board-certified teacher and mom to 3 neurodivergent children, Dayna has sat on both sides of the table when it comes to these challenges. She's developed a compassionate approach based on science and experience to help bring peace and calm to homes and classrooms. Dayna is the author of 𝐅𝐫𝐞𝐞, a fail-proof roadmap for parenting even the most challenging kids, which can be pre-ordered now ahead of its release on August 15th. And I'm so excited to have her share what she's discovered, concepts and principles that can be applied both in the home and in the classroom. Before we jump in, a quick reminder that this is a fantastic time to prepare your Why We Play letters for the new year. These letters will help you jumpstart important conversations in your learning community about the importance and power of play in your early childhood setting. People don't value what they don't understand. If you want to help parents and colleagues understand the value of play, the Why We Play letters were created just for you. Learn more and grab a free sample letter at notjustcute.com/whyweplay. You can find this episode's show notes, which will be full of links, tidbits, and resources at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 60. If you've been wondering how to calm the chaos and shape better behavior, you're in the right place. Let's jump in. Dayna, thanks so much for talking with us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I am honored to be here.
Well, I always like to start out by having people tell a little bit of their background. I think people are always curious about the story and how you came to do what you do.
I sometimes say that I was kind of born into this. So I was raised with a brother who was bipolar. So I got kind of the grunt or the brunt, I never know which word to say, of the aggressive behavior and his explosions. And then I became a teacher. I was taught inner city Chicago and was a teacher for 12 years. And my favorite kids were the kids that really struggled, that all the other teachers kind of knew and talked about in the teacher's lounge. And, they had a paper trail behind them. And so then when I had my own kid, I'm like, I got this gig figured out. I'm going to be the world's best parent. And yeah, that never works out that way, obviously. And so my kid, he came on this earth to teach me a few things about children and about behavior and about humans. And so I spent the first 7 years really struggling with finding ways to help him and feeling like I was just failing every turn. And in second grade, when he was 7, there just became this moment where it was clear that traditional school wasn't going to work for him. The principal actually said to me after a huge meltdown, like, you either need to take him home, figure out what's wrong with him, and don't bring him back until then, or let this officer take him. And she was going to let a police officer take my 7-year-old. And so that was kind of the defining moment of, we've got to do something different.
Yeah. And I love that you advocate not only for your son, but for all of these children that don't fit the mold, that are a little bit harder. You talk about that kid in the book, and you say you're drawn to that kid, and I feel drawn to that kid as well. So tell me a little bit about where you think these children fall through the cracks. Why do you think that is, where we have, like you said, that kid who a lot of adults are willing to just throw up their hands and say, done everything we know how to do? I know they're all very different. There are a lot of different factors.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think some of the reasons are because they don't fit this clinical diagnosable set of criteria. So they're not put in that
Mm-hmm.
area, and then in that bucket. And then they also there's a behavioral piece to it. So it's not that it's a learning, like they're just not able to do, grasp the learning concepts. They're not able to read. They're not able to write. Right? And there's no, like, a lot of times with these kids, there's not like a cognitive delay. And you're just like, well, they're choosing to do this. This is, this kid is just too loud. They just need to learn to be quieter. This kid is too wild. They just need to be calmer. This kid is too aggressive. They just need to learn to manage their emotions. And I think they fall through the cracks because the traditional way of handling this doesn't meet the needs that these kids have.
Mm. And you've worked with this framework as a parent, but you've also worked with schools and you have experience as a teacher. And we talked a little bit earlier about how important it is for schools and parents to get on the same page, especially when it comes to behavior and emotional development, those types of things. So what do you think that we could be doing better to have better coordination and communication between schools and families? I'm sure you have a lot of feelings on that.
I do. I think the first thing, the framework that I teach, it has 4 elements. And the first one is the you piece. Mm-hmm. And that you piece is like our safe place, our mindset. And so I think the first thing that has to happen is that both sides, both parties have to remove the blame, the shame, the guilt around what's working, what's not working. And instead of it being the school's not doing this or the parents not doing this, it's, okay, we've got a kid who's struggling. What do we need to do differently? What is working? What isn't working? And how can we approach this together instead of placing the blame or shame on one party or another?
And it's that child-centered approach, I think, that's really critical. And I heard that before as you were talking about this child that doesn't fit into a box or doesn't follow the flow chart, the plan that we've set out for every generic child, that really a lot of it comes down to that, right? Of seeing the child who is right in front of you, who is unique. Every single one of them is. And when we can, like you said, take away that personal element of the shame, the blame that, well, if it's not the child's fault, then it's my fault. So I'm going to blame somebody, right? Or I'm going to blame the parents. And we take that away and just say, how can we best help this kiddo? How can we best serve that child? So you talk about your framework from Calm the Chaos. And before you jump into that framework, one of the things I appreciate is that you talk about reframing perspectives. And I think some of that is what you've mentioned with you and taking away the guilt. And I think it's so very important when I teach my breakout sessions on behavior, we spend about half of it just talking about perspectives and philosophies, because everything else makes more sense when you have the right lens to look through. So what do you think are some of those big paradigm shifts that adults need to have when it comes to helping children who are struggling?
I mean, I think one of the biggest ones is seeing all behavior as communication. And I know at this point, that's become kind of like the poster for what we say about behavior. And that's a norm. 10 years ago, when I started this, that was not what most people would talk about with behavior. But I think knowing and practicing that belief is 2 different things. I think a lot of educators and a lot of even parents at this point know, okay, there's a reason behind behavior. All right, I need to look at why this is happening. But yet they still make assumptions about why the behavior is happening. Mm-hmm. And only certain behaviors get that perspective lens, but other ones get being manipulative, being controlling, trying to work the system, trying to play you, trying to get their way. I'll hear a lot of times teachers tell me, they'll say, well, they just don't listen because they don't want to do the thing. And I'm like, okay, but there's a reason they don't want to do the thing. So let's go deeper. And I think when we can look at things that way, it really does allow us to have more compassion, more understanding, and then create an environment that allows our kids to thrive. And so that's the main one. The other one is trying to remove as much emotion from the situation as possible. We take behaviors really personally, whether it's as our own children or it's against us, or it's like they just need to learn that I'm in charge. Mm-hmm. We all have that, even if we try really hard not to have that. And I definitely ran across enough principals that had that, like, well, he just needs to learn mentality. And it was like the moment that you take out, like, he's the villain, that child's the problem, and you start saying, okay, this isn't about me. This isn't that they're the villain. This isn't that they're trying to like push my buttons. What is this? You start to see solutions.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big one when you, like you said, you stop seeing the child as a problem and start looking at a problem that you're working with the child together on.
100%.
And it's those little shifts that change, like you said, that emotional element so that your brain shifts, right? So that your brain works better. And you can problem solve together. So important. And that perspective shift, I just don't think all of those, and you go into more, I believe, they just can't be understated how important perspective shifts the whole game.
It's such an important piece. You can have the best strategies in the world. You can have a good relationship. Actually, I think that you can think you have a good relationship, but if you have this perspective that this kid is doing this against you, to you, for for a certain reason, it's going to be really hard to have a really trusting, safe relationship with this child. Like you said, your brain is going to be on high alert, always looking for the next shoe to drop, always looking for that hole they're trying to squeeze through. And so when we can shift that perspective, all the other things can be accessed.
Such an important piece. So your framework, and it's, the whole book covers the framework. So we're just going to dip our toes in it. But you organize it around you, connect, understand, and empower. We started a little bit with you, but I want to talk a little bit more about why you start with the adult. We're focusing on the behavior of children, but the very first place you start is you, the adults. Why is that so important?
Well, first and foremost, you can only control yourself. Like, that is just like the number one thing here. Is so often we want to set up rules or routines. We want to jump to, this best case scenario. But if you or a child are in survival mode, and if you're seeing challenging behaviors, one of you is in survival mode, probably both of you. And so, when that's happening, you can only control you. And when you don't have a full understanding of great relationship with the child, when you don't have that trust built yet, it's going to be really hard to get any buy-in. It's going to be really hard to get through these situations. And so when you start with you and you create a plan for yourself to stay calm, to get through it, I talk about it in the book, but I grew up in Tornado Alley. I live back in Tornado Alley now. Every Wednesday at noon, we hear tornado sirens. And just a couple of months ago, we had a terrible tornado rip through our town, and it devastated the town. Everyone knew what to do. Everyone, the moment the sirens were going off, they went to the basement, they wrote it out. They weren't trying to fix things. They weren't trying to solve. They weren't trying to outrun. They weren't trying to make it last shorter. They just were like, let's write it out. And that's what you have to do as the adult, is find a way to write it out until you have a plan that works.
And what are some of those techniques that you have found work for you or for people that you've worked with when you talk about grounding yourself and finding calm when there's all this chaos around you and there's all this emotion around you? What are a few of those things that you've found have worked most frequently for people to ground themselves in that moment?
Yeah. So when we're working with parents, we have them do something that's called a anchor memory. And this is grounding yourself in a memory of a more positive time. So a lot of times for parents, that's when their child's born and picturing them as a baby. Well, obviously, as a teacher or a director, you can't picture all the kids as babies, but you can ground yourself in why you got into this. You can ground yourself into that deep inner knowing that that belief that all kids are good, whatever it is that actually you believe and that your brain believes. So it has to be something that isn't just a cute saying, right? So if all behaviors communication is still triggering to you, don't use that one. But it's finding something that is like, like when you think of it, you're like, it just like gives you a sigh of relief. And so the key is to practice out of the moment and really stopping And we always think we got to go, go, go. We got to do, do, do. But like in the heat of the moment, it is stop and ground yourself and take some big, deep breaths so your brain has oxygen, and then say that anchor. And you may have to say it over and over again. My anchor that I've used for myself that works for a lot of teachers is, instead of he's doing this to me or she's doing this to me, it's he needs me. And that's it, full stop. So when they say, I hate you, it's like, I need you, right? You're just translating it into I need you, right? And at that point, you don't have to know what they need or why they need it. It's just, okay, they're struggling and I'm going to be here until they're done.
Yeah. Well, that's a powerful anchor to keep in mind. Yeah. That really is what they're saying. Is as much as they're yelling and all that anger, that it's that. I love that you say that translation is I need you, I need help, and I need somebody to see me for who I really am. And I think sometimes for me, one of those mental shifts is to picture those people who have been that for me. So people who have modeled that calmness or who have modeled that compassion, to try to, kind of channel a little bit of their calming energy to try to extend what's been extended to us if we have those models in our lives.
My husband uses that anchor as well. The like, he needs me, and the as a child doesn't work for him because it's a stepchild. And he's like in Hulk mode when he's trying to protect the family. So he's like, that's not working for me either. But what worked for him is he watched 6 grown nurses have to like hold my son to get him into a hospital once. And they were so calm. They were so collected. They were so chill. They were there lovingly, like trying to help my son. And he like pictures them just being this like very calm, steady presence when he's trying to get through a hard moment.
Yeah. It can be helpful to find those models, have those models, and to ponder on what those things are that are triggers for you, so that when you're aware of that this is about me. That trigger is something I can be aware of, right? And not take that personally. So we've done the personal work that you step, and there's more to it as well. If only it was that easy, right? But then you talk about connect as the next step that you focus on. So why do you believe that connection is so important?
Well, we are social beings. And so connecting and belonging is so innate in all of us. I believe that we all have this innate desire to feel seen and heard for who we are. And I think that when we don't feel seen and heard, the frustration either comes out in self-harm or in harming others. And so I truly believe that like the way forward for our kids, and I know that behavior is worse than it's ever been in schools right now, it's relationship building. It's not more academics. It's not more firm boundaries and strict rules. And, there's a very clear like suspension to prison pipeline, right? And so isolation isn't the answer. What's the opposite? Relationships. And so to me, it's all about how can we build, even if it's just one person, right? There's so much research that shows a child only needs one person. So how can we help children feel seen and heard and understood for who they are? Later, we can solve the problem. We can address their needs. But when it's really hard, how do we help them truly feel like they belong, they're being heard, they're being seen?
Yeah. I always say over and over that all of human development happens in the context of human relationships. I mean, that's just like the one truth that runs through all of the research about human development. And I think it's interesting, like you said, there's, behavior's always been a challenge in schools, in teaching, but it really does seem to be expanding, exploding. And I think, like you said, if we just look back to see one of those common factors was how much disconnection we've had over the last few years for so many of these children in so many different ways.
And for the teachers. And you're adding in the stress of all the things that are being asked of teachers. And so that you piece is really missing for them to be able to remain calm, to be like, because they're stressed out. And so it's not just the kids are getting worse. It's that the whole environment has gotten really challenging for both the teachers and for the kids. And so you're seeing more behaviors, but it's not just the kids that are bringing those behaviors.
That's a good point. So what are some of the things that educators can do to build real connection, to not just check the box that, we did a get to know you survey, but real connection? What does that look like?
So I think that is at a big level, it's creating an environment where everyone is seen and heard and has a voice. And so, we used to have class meetings and things like that. And even at 3 years old, right, we would do things like that where we're making decisions together. We're making the class agreements together. But that's like jumping to the end of, that's best case scenario. Like there has to be just some basic levels of that connection is your own body language. And are you huffing and puffing? Are you rolling your eyes? Are you tense with your shoulders? Are you softening your face? Like those are all signals that you are either connected or disconnected, that even if you think you're connected, children are reading as a sign that they're doing something wrong. So if you just got a long list from your director of all the things you need to turn in by the end of the day, and you walk in and you're like, oh, right. And you bring that into the classroom, your kids will see that, right? And if you're like, all right, it's time to sit down, and you're not actually mad at the kid, but that stress is going to come across. So I think it can be really small, nuanced ways to build that connection. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I'm going to visit every kid's home and I'm going to make sure I spend an extra 30 minutes with every kid in my classroom. I mean, those are great, but they're unrealistic. I had 48 kids in my kindergarten classroom, right? It's like, you can't really have one-on-one time with every 40, every child, right. But you can make every child feel like they had one-on-one time by the way you interact with them in the small moments.
And that body language, like you said, getting close to them, physically connecting, hand on the shoulder, the eye contact. There's actually a video. I'll see if I can put it in the show notes. I use it in training that is so powerful from iLabs at the University of Washington, where just what you said, they have it as part of their research. And you can see the videos, they're doing the study, but you see this child interacting, connecting with the researcher, and then another researcher walks in and, just like you described, doesn't yell at the child, but just yells at the other researcher, is carrying all this negative energy. And to see that child shut down immediately is so fascinating first. And then when I show it to a group, there's always a little bit of giggling at first. And then you can just hear people start to their hearts break because they see this child in self-preservation mode and that broken connection there. And so you're so right. So much of the way that we carry ourselves is how we build that connection, how we just show ourselves as being open and eager to connect is a big, big step, and simpler. That, like you said, we can make these lists of things that we would love to do, but the reality prevents it. But we can find those little simple ways to just connect each morning, to show that we see them and care about them. And that connection is really, really so powerful. So your next category is understand. And we kind of alluded to this earlier, to really try to understand the behavior, to not just see a bad kid, but to see a challenging behavior that we are partnering with this child to try to figure out. And it reminded, as I read that section, it reminded me of this quote from Maslow that says that it's tempting to see, if the only tool you have is a hammer, it's tempting to see every problem as a nail, right? That if we think we already know what the answer is and we already know how we're going to fix it, we end up using the wrong tool to try to fix what
100%
that we don't fully understand. So what are some ways, first of all, that you feel like parents and educators are using, quote unquote hammers? They're trying to use this one tool to fix every problem. And we end up getting more and more frustrated with this child when the problem is our choice of tools. Let's start with that one.
Okay. I think one of the most common things that when I work with parents, when I work with educators, it's, well, I just need to set a firmer boundary and then things will get better, right? And I just need to hold my boundaries more, or I need to set a firmer limit. And, maybe I need to limit their time on this, right? So it goes back to limits and boundaries, and you're skipping, anytime you jump to the tool when there's a problem, you're skipping the understanding. And so to answer your tool problem, I think that's the tool we jump to. However, I think when we talk about understanding, the understanding that happens is you jump to exactly what you thought, this assumption. Well, it's because they don't have two parents in the home. Well, mom's really been struggling a lot. She's going through a divorce and, so she's not giving the kid any attention. And so that's why he's acting out. He just wants attention. well, he has ADHD. And, those kids with ADHD, they don't ever sit still. They don't ever pay attention. They don't ever do this, right? So it's because he's on iPad all day, right? When he goes home, all he does is watch YouTube videos. It's the Minecraft. That's what's doing it, right? So we jump to these assumptions about why kids are doing what they're doing, and it clouds all the other information that we could be gaining from what's going on with them, and looking at it from, and I hate saying a scientific way because it sounds really boring. You're like, I don't want to be scientific. Like, I want to be heartfelt, right? But like in this instance, when we're trying to understand behavior, there's so much good science out there. Why would we avoid it? Mm-hmm. And really using that science to our advantage to look at the whole picture, and not just they're doing this because they want something or because they don't want something. There's so much else going on that we really need to dive into.
And that difference, like you said, between being curious and trying to understand where it's coming from versus just making an assumption. And I love actually that connection to science, because scientists don't make assumptions. They have hypotheses and then they check them out and look for other details or other confirming evidence. But we don't just make assumptions. And because sometimes we find out what seemed to be an obvious assumption was absolutely wrong. And I've run into that with behavior, right? Where I assume I know exactly what's going on. And then with a little more time or a little more curiosity, realize that was not at all it. That had nothing to do with it, right?
Absolutely. And so that's like some of the tools that I've created in the Calm the Chaos framework are there to help, even if you don't have a PhD in child behavior, right? Mm-hmm. Like, even as an educator, not all educators have like a full deep dive into why behavior happens. And so having a quick, easy way to be like, okay, what's a general rule of thumb that I can kind of checklist down or kind of think through as I'm trying to unravel what's going on here or where this behavior could be coming from, so I can make a hypothesis, like you just said. Okay, I wonder if it's this. Let me check. I wonder if it's this. Let me check. And that's what some of the tools in the book do for you, is they say, well, check basic needs first, mm-hmm. right? Check connection, check sensory needs, but go in this order, because it's like a process of elimination.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a helpful guide. And what do you say to people who maybe feel like having this empathy goes too far to become condoning or excusing? And sometimes, on the flip side, I think there's some who don't want to use this approach because they feel like it's too permissive. But on the flip side, I think there are people who think they're being empathetic and they actually are being permissive. So how do you walk that line to make sure that we're actually being empathetic and moving forward, rather than just saying, oh, well, the behavior's because of this, so we're just going to let it happen, right?
Yeah. So I think that would be, if I was coming to you and I would say, I've created this framework and it's just about understanding, and you're only going to look at mm-hmm. why the behavior is happening, and that's it. And there's no other pieces to this puzzle, right? And I think that's what some of the problems are with behavior systems or with classroom management systems is like, here's this one piece. You're going to connect more, right? Or you're going to create empowerment systems, right? But it's a holistic view. And so in the moment, you are not solving the problem. And so in the moment, you're having compassion, you're having empathy, you're understanding. Out of the moment, you're unraveling, you're figuring it out, you're taking it to the kid and you're problem solving with them. And you're creating systems that help them thrive, so that it's not something that is their go-to, so that when a kid is frustrated, they don't think that they need to use hitting. They have another tool in their toolbox, but you can't jump to giving them another tool if you don't really know why they're hitting in the first place.
I think that's a great explanation, that understanding and empathy piece is a part of that problem solving mm-hmm. process. It isn't the process itself, but it's this piece of it that helps you know where to go next, so that you can
and they're not alone. I hear it so much, like we're just allowing it, mm-hmm. or I hear the opposite side. Well, they've got sensory needs, and I'm like, okay, let's create a system for it, right? So that they can be successful and the people around them can feel successful.
Yeah. So as you move towards that system, the next step that you talk about is empower. And I think that might sound counterintuitive to some people, that you're going to take a child who seems to be out of control and you're going to give them more power. Or like you were saying before, they're just trying to get attention, or they're just trying. So do the opposite. Don't give them any power. Why is it so important to help these children actually feel powerful? And how do we do that in appropriate ways?
Yeah, so I think it happens in levels, but I think it's really important for kids to have self-awareness and autonomy. And I think it adds to that. I feel seen and heard and valued for who I am. My
Mhm.
voice matters, my opinions matter, my needs, my desires matter. And you listen to me and you care about what I have to say. And that goes a really long way when a child is going to be, if they have that modeled to them, they then will model that again. And that's where you get the ripple effect of like world change. And we've seen it happen time and time again where, parents, and the empowerment piece starts with you, right? Like you need a plan first to feel empowered, to know what to say, what to do in the heat of the moment without losing your cool, without making things worse. And then we talk about empowerment being these like plan for conversations, having these huddles, these like brainstorming, and they're honestly like great teaching methods, right? Having brainstorming sessions and doing problem solving, and your concern is this, my concern is this. Okay, how can we solve this? And coming up with solutions together, and you're collaborating. And then the systems, once you've got that problem solving and that trust built, now you can start building up routines that work for everyone. Not just here's our routine, we're doing it this way, but this routine that's going to work for everyone. Here's an agreement. We agree that when we're frustrated, we're going to go to a safe place. We agree that we're going to try to keep our hands to ourselves. Now, notice I said try, because we're all human, right? And so then you're allowing that humanness. And then we're going to say, and when we hurt others, we agree that we're going to, solve the problem together. We're going to try to work through it. And by doing that, by creating these systems, we're modeling for our kids how to be problem solvers, how to be collaborative, how to work and communicate with others that aren't like them. And so when they leave the classroom, that skill is something they're going to take with them for life.
Yeah. And so that empowerment aspect is to, like you said, give us and them a plan that we feel empowered when we know what we're supposed to do. We have a plan, whether it's scripts or a system, like you're saying. And that ultimately that's what we want, is for our children to be empowered with good tools themselves, so that we're not rushing in and fixing every problem. We're not coming in to calm down every blow up, that we're empowering them with tools to have self-discipline, to manage themselves, and to be able to be, like you said, to problem solve together, whether that's with us or with their peers or in their future with whomever. And so it's so important to realize that preparation is empowering for us, and it's empowering for them. And that ultimately that's really what we want, is for these children to be empowered with positive tools.
100%.
The best outlook. Now, in this whole process, it's also important to recognize this isn't like a quick fix, right? Then we do step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 minutes have gone by, and now everything's perfect again, right?
No, that is not it. I mean, and there's so much out there that it's like, there's the magic 1, 2, 3, and it's all fixed. And it's like, that does not work like that.
So can you talk a little bit about the patience that's required for real change, that when we really want to build this self-discipline and not just manipulate children, but we want to build something in them and for their future? What do you want, especially educators, to know that will help them to recognize progress along the way, so that they can continue that patience that's required, and avoid that easy fix temptation?
Yeah, I think it's not all or nothing, right? We're looking for that quick win. And so instead of looking for it's all terrible or nothing's working, that's when we look for one system that's going to cure it all. And that's just not going to work. We can't solve everything at once. And so realistically, like if I started tomorrow working out and lifting weights, I'm not going to be in a bodybuilding competition in a week. Like that's just not going to happen. And so we have to take that same concept with when we're teaching kids and we're growing minds and helping them develop, and we're trying to change our way of doing things, because everyone has, as a teacher, as an educator, you've got patterns that you and habits that you have grown accustomed to. It's going to take some time undoing some of those and tweaking some of those. So it's about creating those quick wins for yourself, those very small, like today I had like 5% more energy than I did most days, or today they cleaned up 5 minutes faster than they did yesterday. But you're looking for that small progress right from the very beginning, and you're taking it one step at a time. You're focusing on just small tweaks. What's working, what's not, and what's one small tweak I can make to keep moving forward.
And when we look for that progress, we see it. We see
Yes.
what we look for, right? If we want to look for things to be angry about, we'll find those things. And if we want to look for those little wins, we find them every day.
There's a million and one things to be frustrated about, right? Then as a parent or as an educator, there are a myriad of things going wrong. But if that's all we focus on, that's all we're going to see. And our body language is going to show it. Mm-hmm. And our assumptions are going to show it. And the way that we approach a child is going to change. Whereas if we're looking for, oh, look, they did help that kid. Okay, so they do like working with other kids. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. I'm going to use that as a new anchor, right? You're now going to start noticing even more of those moments when you notice that one thing.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, recognizing that those small wins, we see that gradual nature of growth. And I think sometimes it's easier for us to see that from a teaching mindset. I remind teachers, we don't get mad because children came in and we told them the whole alphabet on day 1 and they didn't know it on day 2. We recognize that it takes time for them to learn, to learn the ABCs or to tie their shoes or to read any of those things. We recognize that it takes time and that there are going to be mistakes along the way. And when we take that same framework and we look at behavior with that same framework to recognize it will take time, there will be mistakes along the way. And like you said, we can look for those small wins to remind us of that progress. It helps when we shift it to that learning mindset that we're learning and we're growing.
There will be, I always say, don't judge your progress on your worst day.
Right.
Because there will be setbacks. There will be, I call them storms, right? There will be another storm that brews. There will be, you'll be making forward progress and then it'll feel like you're making one step forward, 2 steps back. But you have to keep focusing on those tiny changes because you won't see the progress until you're so much further down the road, mm-hmm. right? It's kind of like when you haven't seen your nephew in 3 years and all of a sudden you're like, when did you become an actual adult?
Right.
Just yesterday you were, 2 inches high. I don't understand, right? But there's been that passage of time so you can see the growth, whereas the parents don't really see it. I don't see my 15-year-old growing. I know he is because he doesn't fit in any of the clothes I bought him. But other than that, I can't actually see how he's changing. But if I had that passage of time, I would definitely notice.
Yeah. Well, there's so many great perspectives and tools all wrapped up in this book. And we've only had it, like I said, just dipped our toes into it just a little bit, but it's clear that there are so many resources that will be helpful for parents in their home as well as for schools. And like we said before, if we can get onto the same page, it will serve children so much better. So I want to leave with just one last question, because you do have that experience on both sides of the table in really, really difficult, challenging situations. Is there one thing, one perspective maybe that you could leave that would help educators to recognize how to communicate better with parents in these really charged situations where you have both parents and teachers who maybe are feeling at their wits' end, they're feeling defensive? What is maybe one perspective that would help them to get onto the same team a little bit better and a little bit easier to better serve children? What would you want educators to know in that moment?
Okay. So the thing that's coming to me, I have 2 things, if that's okay. Because I have something a little tactical, and then I have something that's more of just it was a feeling. Mm-hmm. So I'll do the tactical first. The tactical is, I truly believe everyone wants what's best for the kid. Mm-hmm. They, with whatever skill set they have, whatever background they have. And so if you can enter the situation, removing that shame and blame that we talked about at the beginning and being like, okay, I'm going to go in with the belief that everybody wants what's best for this kid. And I'm going to find the common ground and hear what they're saying through the perspective of they just want what's best for him. They just want what's best for her. They're just trying to get this outcome. And then you can go at it and say, what is it you're hoping would be the outcome here? What are you wanting to happen? And when you know what's on the table, what people want, it's a lot easier to start making solutions for that. So that's the tactical piece. But the mindset piece, and the thing that I just from my heart want to say is that if you are a teacher or you are a director or an educator or principal, you might be the one person in this child's life that's going to save their life, that's going to see them for who they are, that is going to understand them and value them. And knowing that you could be that only person in this child's life that's going to give them that, I would hope that you would give them your all, that you would be there for them, because you won't know in this moment, but that child will. They'll know 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, there was that one principal, there was that one teacher. She listened to me. He heard me. He really got me. And it's going to make a world of difference.
It's really, really powerful. Well, thank you, Dayna, for everything that you've done to help us calm the chaos and everything that you're doing for children and for families and for educators. It's really important and really powerful work. So thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 60. There you'll find links and other fascinating tidbits I know you'll love. You can also hit up the show notes for a link to the Why We Play letters. Head to notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 60, or go straight to notjustcute.com/Why We Play to get signed up and download your free sample letter. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. You can also stay tuned for social media updates on Instagram by following me at Amanda_NotJustCute. Thanks for listening today, and as always, thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.